Welcome back to the workshop, everybody. Today I will be making one of the coolest things I have ever made. Dare I say, the coolest small knife I have ever made. Today we're making a push dagger. One of my favorite types of knives, very unique. It has an upright blade and a horizontal handle to be held like this in the hand with the blade peeking out between your middle finger and your ring finger, or your ring finger and your index finger. Now this piece is a very special one to me personally because it's a design that I came up with a long time ago and have really wanted to make ever since, but haven't had the time or justification to put a few hundred hours into making it. Not only the design is unique and very special to me, but the pattern is as well. Now, I have actually already forged this pattern. I did that a while ago when I had a little bit of time in between projects to do something, because I really wanted to see if this pattern would turn out as cool as I thought it would. So we're gonna be starting from after forging and surface grinding. For this particular pattern, I combined feather Damascus with 2 bars of twisted mosaic Damascus in a serpentine forged joinery. So it's not quite the wolf tooth method, as a lot of people know, where you cut or forge jagged teeth into both sides so they fit together like a puzzle, and then you forge weld them together like that. It is a serpentine version of that, and it is completely forged to shape and forged specifically to fit on a very, very small dagger blade, which is not something you see very often, you know, small pattern being intentionally forged to fit perfectly on small knives. The handle on this piece is going to be super tricked out with a lot of really cool materials and designs. The main body of the handle is going to be made from black buffalo horn, which is a beautiful material and has a lot of natural chatoyance and very subtle grain to it, and it polishes up unbelievably well, but it is extremely tricky to work with. The bolster area and the tiny butt cap are going to be made from antiqued bronze, and the pommel nut is also going to be made from mosaic Damascus. Let's start to refine the shape with some files and the grinder and get it ready for heat treat.
Now, I know a lot of you are probably pretty disappointed that you didn't get to see the forging of this piece, and had I known I was going to make it into a YouTube video, I certainly would have filmed that process. I forged it several months ago, and actually as I was forging it, I wasn't even sure it would look good or work in the first place, since it was a pretty experimental type of pattern that I had never done before. And the forging process on this small piece with lots of funky forge welds is extremely time sensitive and difficult for me to film by myself in the first place, so my search for a cameraman continues. Before heat treat, I'm not going to be grinding the fuller at all. That's because I need the flat in that center of the knife to use as a reference plane for the entire handle. And if I were to grind the fuller and the full bevels, there would be practically no flat left. So on this knife, I'm doing something that I practically never do, which is after heat treat, I'm going to wait till the very end to finish grind the knife, because I need that flat there to do the entire handle shaping process.
This thing has been quenched and snap tempered. Now, there's something I want to show you on this piece right here. That is the reason that I encourage so many people to use anti-scaling solution. When you quench, you know, people may be scared of putting that clay all over because they associate it with hamon lines, and they may think, oh, it may not harden as well. It pops off immediately as you quench, and it does not insulate the steel at all. You're left with a blade that has a beautiful, in this case, 400 and 220 grit finish. You can see I've touched it on the granite block real quick. You can see it has scratched right up here and right down there, and on this side is scratched right in the center there. I know I have a very gentle ward going across the full distance of the blade to fix. Just no big deal. I'll do that in the temper, specifically the second temper cycle. The main thing I want to show you is the lack of forge scale. I mean, that is just gorgeous. It looks as though you just took it out of a foil packet. And because I took it up to a pretty high grit before heat treat, all of my lines are super crispy. There's no pitting, there's no flaking. It is nice and reflective still. I highly recommend that you get some of that anti-scaling solution. Do this on on your own blades, especially if you're going for a very high degree of precision. So let's get this blade in the temper. I quenched it at 1485 and I'm going to temper it at 385 for 2 cycles of 2 hours, which should give us an excellent balance of hardness and toughness. Man, let me tell you, this is gonna be gnarly.
While I'm straightening the blade in its second 2-hour temper cycle, I'm going to go ahead and forge the bronze bolster. I'm using a piece of aluminum bronze for this, which forges beautifully.
So, as an update, we have the knife fully scribed out of heat treat. These surfaces are up to 600 grit finish. These scribe lines are very, very light, not actually scratching the steel, just removing the dicom, so I don't have to redress the surface. As you can see, I have all of those scribe lines and that matrix grid scribed on there. That's gonna help me sculpt this portion very, very accurately at the end, but the main thing that this is doing right now is telling me what parts need to be submerged in the guard bolster part that goes into the handle. So now comes the extremely tricky step of milling out the bolster. This is a large reason as to why this project is so difficult, the milling of the bolster, because it is a very unorthodox tang. So as you can see, I have this temporarily super glued to a 1-2-3 block in perfect orientation this way, so that I can very, very easily scribe lines and make precise measurements. Basically all of that's done already. I just wanted to show you guys a really nifty way of making perfect measurements on a blade that has no straight lines on it. Now it's time to mill out that guard.
The junction between the shoulders of the blade and the bolster are very, very exposed on this piece, so I have to make sure that it is absolutely seamless and that there are 0 gaps, because they'll be super obvious in the end. So I'm using the combination of a tiny carbide ball burr and my microscope to remove the interior material and let those shoulders seat deeply into the bolster. Once I get the blade perfectly fit up to the bolster, it's time to finish profile the bolster. This is a very, very intricate and tricky process, and I cannot take off too much material. And I also have to keep an eye on my scribe lines to make sure that it's perfectly symmetrical.
Folks, the second hardest part of this entire build is done. The milling and slotting of this beautiful aluminum bronze bolster onto the dagger blade. Everything looks absolutely perfect. I've measured it all and my tolerances here are within 1/1000th of an inch. So if it's a 0.5 off, not a big deal. That's the difference of a few strokes with a 400 grit sandpaper. There are so many gradual and exponential curves on this piece. It is extremely difficult to measure irregular curves to an extremely high level of symmetry, especially when it comes to the next part of this build, the handle. No, this is not the mustache from the Who Hot guy, although it seriously resembles the mustache from the Who Hot guy. I think it's the Who Hot guy. I'm pretty sure there's a guy associated with Who Hot that has a mustache identical to this. Anyways, the next part is going to be using this beautiful block of buffalo horn, cutting out a piece using this stencil to make sure I don't get too close to our final dimensions. And once we have that cut out, I'm gonna square up that block on the mill to make sure it's perfectly square. And then we will shape the section that actually meets up with the bottom of the bolster. So let's get the Who Hot mustache on the block of black cheese and cut out a piece for our handle. There's gotta be a Who Hot guy with a mustache, right? Somehow I remember that. Okay, maybe my memory was a little bit off. I don't think that's it. There's gotta be something else. I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of something else. There is a mustache somewhere in the ethos that looks identical to this. Tell me in the comments what it is, or that's gonna drive me crazy. Here's a close-up of all of the joining sections here. It looks absolutely snaztastic. There's no light coming through here. I'm happy with this. I'm gonna do some final shaping on the back of this joint here and make this, and make this inverse point here a bit more crispy. And then we're gonna move on to cutting and shaping our piece of buffalo horn. I always forget how disgusting buffalo horn smells. It smells unbelievably bad.
Working with any material that's made from keratin, so like horn or ivory, presents a lot of difficulty in that it's made from thousands and thousands of tiny little layers of material, and if you overheat it while grinding, that grain structure can actually deform, causing warps or checks, so you need to be extremely careful to keep it cool by using sharp belts and going slowly. And immediately after removing material with a rough grit, you need to smooth out that surface so there's no big scratch marks that could be stress risers that make it easier for little fissures to open up. The fit up between the bolster and the handle material is one of the more difficult parts of this project, both because buffalo horn is just a finicky material to work with, and also because it's really easy to remove too much material while doing this. So I'm rubbing the bolster against the handle material, seeing where it contacts, and then spot removing material with sandpaper until the fit up is perfect. After threading the tang and boring out the back of the handle material, it's time to start on the Explosion Mosaic Damascus pommel nut.
We have the back of the buffalo horn handle bored out for the pommel nut. Pommel nut is now 2 size, that is 0.375. Now the next step is to essentially bed the top of this with the bottom of this. Now, why would you need to do this, right? It is perfectly fit up. There's no light coming through that at all. And that is because organic materials like this that have a strong grain like ivory or horn has a tendency to create tiny little micro cracks. So when you take a large amount of material off of something like this, it's a great idea to completely cover those freshly ground areas with something like super liquidy epoxy or even super glue in some some cases. So we're gonna go with epoxy here. We're gonna mix that epoxy with some black dye so it blends in nicely. And then we're gonna cover the bottom of this with some grease, and we're gonna tighten everything down with that pommel nut. Let that epoxy cure up and then pop it back off again. That epoxy will easily detach from this greased up surface, and it will stay embedded in this and keep that face stable. So there's no chance of warping or checking over time. I made this little bronze washer that's actually going to sit in the bottom of the hole that I've milled out here on the shoulders where the pommel nut sits, so that when I'm screwing this pommel nut into the inside of here, it is extremely strong and has that beautiful bronze surface there to come in contact with, so I can get everything nice and tight.
As the epoxy sets up, I start processing the bronze butt plate that's going to go on the bottom of that buffalo horn handle. This is yet another challenging element to this build because this butt plate is going to be abnormally shaped and extremely tiny. Additionally, the fit up between the butt plate and the handle material is probably going to be even more difficult than the fit up between the bolster and the handle material. That's because it is much smaller and actually inlaid into the back. So it's not just sitting on the surface, it is subsurface. And so all of those fit up seams need to be absolutely perfect, and there is zero room for error.
I get the question a lot of, how do you install alignment pins on something that you've pre-fit and pre-shaped? How do you get those holes to line up perfectly? And this is a tricky process, especially with something like this. So what I like to do is I have my two brass alignment pins here. I like to use brass because A, it doesn't rust, and B, I always want my alignment pins to be softer than my bolster material. This is aluminum bronze, so brass is a little bit softer than that, more malleable. As you can see, I have drilled two 3/32 holes. I started them with just the very tip of a sharp drill bit, and then I finished them with a slightly dull drill bit. Now the reason I do that is because a slightly dull drill bit will raise up the outsides of those holes and kind of make a natural ring around them that perfectly outlines the hole, so that when I put the bolster back on the knife and fit the handle piece up to it and screw it tight with the pommel nut, those rings actually imprint themselves into the handle material so that you have a perfect outline of where those holes are going to go. When you're drilling holes for alignment pins, it is very important that they are parallel, meaning that if you have a dished pommel or a spacer or a guard that is curved, like this one, you should not be drilling holes at these angles, because obviously you can't physically fit them together then. They have to be parallel. Yeah. I use an end mill for this process because this surface is curved. Then you have full contact of that circle exactly where you're hitting, so you can tell if that circle is perfectly aligned with the hole. Let's go over to the mill and drill these holes out. So as you can see, got the alignment pins in the buffalo horn handle. Push the blade right on there, and it fits like an absolute glove. Now, with this butt cap, that fit up is super flush. See how nice and flush that is? Very good. And then this is going to be actually epoxied onto the back of the handle with some internal pins that I'm going to install later on in the process. Right now though, it is time to shape our bolster. Now this is one of the most tricky parts of this entire thing because it has to A, keep the same width here. B, taper enough here so that it's not absurdly wide and so that it looks good from a side profile. And also, I'm going to put chamfers in all the way around on all of these, as you saw in the original design. And because this is going to be tapering, those chamfers have to kind of twist as they go up, which is always tricky. It's not as simple as putting an angled work rest on a grinder or using a contact wheel. I'm gonna have to go in and hand sculpt all of those and really dial those in with files. But good thing I enjoy filing things. So the first step here is pop this off, get this thing over to the grinder and start shaping it. I have scribed on a few lines there, which are the lines of the narrowest point of the front, the thickest point of the back, and I'm going to do a concave taper from that line to this line, most likely using my radius platen to do that very, very subtle concave so it's uniform on both sides.
Now that the bolster is completely sculpted and the butt cap is roughly fit up, it's time to start sculpting the piece of buffalo horn for the handle. This is one of the most difficult and one of the most crucial steps to get right in this entire process, because if I remove too much material, which is extremely easy to do, I just have to start all over again on the handle. The thing that makes this so difficult is the fact that I'm doing a museum fit, and it is a complex museum fit at that. I've lightly scribed on the perimeter of the bolster onto the top of the handle, and I have to come within 20 thousandths of an inch of that line, no more and no less, to get a continuous and proper museum fit. Most of the handle is finish sculpted up to 600 grit at this point, but to finish sculpt the bottom of the handle where it meets the butt cap, I first have to complete one of the most intricate and delicate tasks in this entire build, which is finishing the butt cap.
Good morning, folks. It is 4:30 a.m. right now. I just got to the shop and I kind of had a meltdown last night on the way home from the shop, because when I'm not here and I try to conceptualize a really complex step that I'm about to do and I don't have it in front of me to like sanity check myself, I for some reason assume that I'm a big dumb idiot and that I for sure messed it up beyond reconciliation, but I did not. So yeah, we have this thing shaped very close to final dimensions. There's a few little micro facets here and there that I need to fix, but that'll be very easy work, because for all of its difficulties, this material is very easy to hand sand and polish. Actually, no, it's easy to hand sand. Actually, you know what? It's not even easy to hand sand, because once you get above 1,000 grit, it gums up your sandpaper immediately. And then polishing, you have to do extremely carefully, because horn or any kind of organic keratin, if it overheats with a rotary tool, it will just disintegrate, basically. So it's very easy to gouge this material out while buffing it. Let me amend my statement from earlier, Harry. A good polish on buffalo will always be there for those who deserve it. Yes. Dude, a wizard came by about a month ago, knocked on the door, and I opened it up. He was like, "I cast Month of Coughs!" To quote Wilford Brimley, that is exactly the way it's been. I have been coughing nonstop for about a month, and it hurts. It's getting really old. Anyways, here's the butt cap. I shaped it into a diamond. I have to do further shaping on it. The next step, it has to be contoured and shaped like the back of the handle itself, right? So curved over. It's going to be museum fit to the buffalo horn. So we're doing kind of like an inverted museum fit, so that the buffalo horn and the bronze are both the proud one at some point, which is tricky. Tricky. So yeah, there's a lot of really difficult parts about this. This material is not forgiving, and if I mess it up, I gotta start over. Completo. Shape up, Smitty. This is just a complete waste of time. The teeny tiny little diamond shaped butt cap is now completed. It looks fantastic. I'm so happy with the delicate proportions on this thing. It is teeny tiny and awesome. So all the stuff for me to do on the handle after the bronze fittings are all finished up is to get this thing coated in some true oil, because horn actually can soak up a little bit of oil, surprisingly. And then I will polish that, and of course the pommel nut. Now you guys know that the pommel nut is generally the last thing that I do on anything, and that's because over time, the more times you put together a knife that's a takedown construction over and over again, the tighter you can torque it down just a little bit, because things become more compact as you fit it up over and over again. So before I do this and, you know, cut it, shape it, mill it, heat treat it, and all that stuff, I am going to finish grind the blade. I've covered it in Dicam. I'm letting that Dicam dry, and then I'm going to scribe on all of our lines for our super delicate fuller, and then the bevels themselves, of course, which are going to be just as delicate. Grinding this thing is one of those things that I just can't mess up. Technically, it's not the most difficult grind I've ever done, but because it's on such a small scale, everything has to be perfect. There's no room for error. Let's get over to the grinder, finish grind this beautiful Damascus push dagger blade.
I start off by very carefully sculpting in that teardrop shaped fuller with the vertical fullering wheel. Now, because I want this fuller to end in a legitimate point, I have to continuously change the radius on the rubber fullering wheel by actually grinding it to a different shape. And once I have the main body of the fuller done, I move to the horizontal fullering wheel to dial in the termination point that's right above the point of the bolster.
I'm gonna finish the pommel nut completely up to the point of where I'm gonna etch it. The way that I'm going to actually make the pommel key and fasten that, I want it to be pretty fancy with it. And I've done one thing before on a past push dagger where I drill 3 holes in a triangular configuration and then match the pommel key to those 3 holes. So basically the pommel key has 3 prongs coming out that match into those holes, so you can then easily take it on and off with the pommel nut in a way that's not too obnoxious or disruptive to the pattern on the pommel. It also looks pretty cool.
If I had a rotary table for my mill, this process would be significantly easier, but I don't. So I'm forced to harness the power of 1, 2, 3 blocks in blue Dicam to get a really nice precise set of 3 equidistant holes. While the pommel nut tempers, I coat the handle in a layer of true oil. This will soak in, and I will wipe off the excess later on before it cures.
So the blade is hand sanded all the way up to 1500 grit, and man, it looks fantastic. I am a huge fan of this profile. I am actually going to etch the blade now because I have my maker's mark engraved in there already. I'm going to etch the blade and the pommel nut and get those things finished up and ready for assembly. And then after that, probably while these things are coffee etching, I'm going to get the bronze elements of this finished completely. I'm going to do one final blast on them, patina them, and then antique them. And so basically everything in this entire project will be completely done except for the final polish polish on the handle, and then of course I'm going to epoxy that butt plate onto the back of the handle. Let's get this beautiful little push dagger blade etched. We're gonna start with ferrochloride, and once we reach the depth that we really want, we're gonna move over to coffee etching.
To keep the fit up between the blade and the bolster nice and tight, I coat the shoulders and then the part that's covered by the bolster in nail polish before etching. This will protect it from being corroded away and ensure that I still have an extremely tight fit up between the bolster and the blade. While the blade and pommel nut coffee etch, I am using brass black to blacken the bolster and butt cap before buffing them lightly with steel wool to achieve that beautiful worn antiqued look. After the blade and pommel nut are done coffee etching, one of the final steps to this entire process is coating the blade and pommel nut in carnauba wax. I use a heat gun to embed the molten carnauba wax in the black oxide layers of the steel. Once carnauba wax solidifies, it's extremely hard and provides a great protective layer over those black oxides to hold them in place and protect them from the elements. And now with every element of this piece completely finished, it's time for the final assembly. This turned out to be my favorite small knife that I have ever made. If you've watched up until this point, I want to thank you so much for sticking around. I put a ton of effort into making these knives and making these videos for you guys, so if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing to my channel. It means the world, and with that, I hope you enjoy the final product.
The idea I had for an amazing push dagger many months ago has finally become a reality, and I honestly could not be any happier with how this project came out. The experimental pattern came out perfectly and looks outstanding. Highly sculpted bolster leading up onto the blade, that mirror polished black buffalo horn for the handle, that really cool junction between the shoulders and the bolster there, and then the matching pommel key that I made with the 3-prong. It is made with buffalo horn to match the handle and then hardened steel for the prong, so it's extremely durable. It's safe to say this is certainly my favorite small knife that I've ever made. And I have some super exciting and extremely challenging builds coming up in the next few months that I'm going to be making into YouTube videos. But I just want to thank everybody who's watched this far for watching, and I will see you in the next one.